The President of the United States about to walk into this room and hold a news conference at the end of this NATO summit here in Chicago. The President will presumably open up with a statement about Afghanistan, the exit strategy for the United States in Afghanistan, some other related issues. Then it'll open it up to some questions from reporters who have gathered at this NATO summit to see what the President has going on. The President has just come from a meeting with the Afghan President Hamid Karzai, the Pakistani President Asif Ali Zardari. It was a very brief little three-way meeting, more like a photo opportunity as opposed to a meeting, but he's been meeting individually with a lot of these NATO allies and these NATO officials who have come here. President joined by some of his top national security advisors, including the Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. Hamid Karzai my interview with him will follow the President.
Good afternoon, everybody. Let me begin by saying thank you to my great friend Rahm Emanuel, the mayor of the city of Chicago, and to all my neighbors and friends, the people of the city of Chicago, for their extraordinary hospitality and for everything that they've done to make this summit such a success. I could not be prouder to welcome people from around the world to my hometown. This was a big undertaking. Some 60 world leaders, not to mention folks who were exercising their freedom of speech and assembly, the very freedoms that our alliance are dedicated to defending. And so it was a lot to carry for the people of Chicago, but this is a city of big shoulders. Rahm, his team, Chicagoans proved that this world-class city knows how to put on a world-class event. And partly this was a perfect city for this summit because it reflected the bonds between so many of our countries. For generations, Chicago has welcomed immigrants from around the world, including an awful lot of our NATO allies. And I'd just add that I've lost track of the number of world leaders and their delegations who came up to me over the last day and a half and remarked on what an extraordinarily beautiful city Chicago is, and I could not agree more. I'm especially pleased that I had a chance to show them Soldier Field. I regret that I was not able to take in one of the Crosstown Classics, although I will note that my teams did okay. Now, White Sox fan in the back. Right on. Now, as I said yesterday, NATO has been the bedrock of common security, freedom, and prosperity for nearly 65 years. It hasn't just endured, it has thrived, because our nations are stronger when we stand together. We saw that, of course, most recently in Libya, where NATO afforded capabilities that no one else in the world could match. As president, one of my top foreign policy priorities has been to strengthen our alliances, including NATO. And that's exactly what we've done. 2 years ago in Lisbon, we took action in several areas that are critical to the future of our alliance, and we pledged that in Chicago we would do more. Over the last 2 days, we have delivered. First, we reached agreement on a series of steps to strengthen the alliance's defense capabilities over the next decade. In keeping with the strategic concept we agreed to in Lisbon, and in order to fulfill our Article 5 commitment to our collective security. We agreed to acquire a fleet of remotely piloted aircraft, drones, to strengthen intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. We agreed to continue air patrols over our Baltic allies, which reflects our unwavering commitment to collective defense. We also agreed on a mix of conventional, nuclear missile, and missile defense forces that we need. And importantly, we agreed on how to pay for them. And that includes pooling our resources in these difficult economic times. We're moving forward with missile defense and agreed that NATO is declaring an interim capability for this system. America's contribution to this effort will be a phased adaptive approach that we're pursuing on European missile defense. And I want to commend our allies who are stepping up and playing a leadership role in missile defense as well. Our defense radar in Turkey will be placed under NATO control. Spain, Romania, and Poland have agreed to host key U.S. assets. The Netherlands will be upgrading radars, and we look forward to contributions from other allies. Since this system is neither aimed at nor undermines Russia's strategic deterrent, I continue to believe that missile defense can be an area of cooperation with Russia. Second, we're now unified behind a plan to responsibly wind down the war in Afghanistan, a plan that trains Afghan security forces, transitions to the Afghans, and builds a partnership that can endure after our combat mission in Afghanistan ends. Since last year, we've been transitioning parts of Afghanistan to the Afghan National Security Forces, and that has enabled our troops to start coming home. Indeed, we're in the process of drawing down 33,000 U.S. troops by the end of this summer. Here in Chicago, we reached agreement on the next milestone in that transition. At the ISAF meeting this morning, we agreed that Afghan forces will take the lead for combat operations next year, in mid-2013. At that time, ISAF forces will have shifted from combat to a support role in all parts of the country. And this will mark a major step toward the goal we agreed to in Lisbon, completing the transition to Afghan lead for security by the end of 2014, so that Afghans can take responsibility for their own country, and so our troops can come home. This will not mark the end of Afghanistan's challenges, obviously, or our partnership with that important country. But we are making substantial progress against our core objective of defeating al-Qaeda and denying its safe haven, while helping the Afghans to stand on their own. And we leave Chicago with a clear roadmap. Our coalition is committed to this plan to bring our war in Afghanistan to a responsible end. We also agreed on what NATO's relationship with Afghanistan will look like after 2014. NATO will continue to train, advise, and assist and support Afghan forces as they grow stronger. And while this summit has not been a pledging conference, it's been encouraging to see a number of countries making significant financial commitments to sustain Afghanistan's progress in the years ahead. Today, the international community also expressed its strong support for efforts to bring peace and stability to South Asia, including Afghanistan's neighbors. Finally, NATO agreed to deepen its cooperation with partners that have been critical to alliance operations, as in Afghanistan and Libya. Today's meeting was unprecedented. Our 28 allies, joined by 13 nations from around the world: Europe, the Middle East, North Africa, and Asia. Each of these countries has contributed to NATO operations in different ways: military, political, financial, and each wants to see us do more together. To see the breadth of those countries represented in that room is to see how NATO has truly become a hub of global security. So, again, I want to thank all my fellow leaders. I think the bottom line is that we are leaving Chicago with a NATO alliance that is stronger, more capable, and more ready for the future. As a result, each of our nations, the United States included, is more secure, and we're in a stronger position to advance the security and prosperity and freedom that we seek around the world. So with that, I'm going to take a couple of questions, and I'm going to start with Julie Pace of AP. Where's Julie? There she is.
Thank you, Mr. President. You've said that the U.S. can't deal with Afghanistan without also talking about Pakistan. And yet there's been little public discussion at this summit about Pakistan's role in ending the war. In your talks with President Zardari today, did you make any progress in reopening the supply lines? And if the larger tensions with Pakistan can't be resolved, does that put the NATO coalition's gains in Afghanistan at risk?
Well, keep in mind, my discussion with President Zardari was very brief as we were walking into the summit. And I emphasized to him what we've emphasized publicly as well as privately. We think that Pakistan has to be part of the solution in Afghanistan, that it is in our national interest to see a Pakistan that is democratic, that is prosperous, and that is stable, that we share a common enemy in the extremists that are found not only in Afghanistan but also within Pakistan, and that we need to work through some of the tensions that have inevitably arisen after 10 years of our military presence in that region. President Zardari shared with me his belief that these issues can get worked through. We didn't anticipate that the supply line issue was going to be resolved by this summit. We knew that before we arrived in Chicago. But we're actually making diligent progress on it. And I think ultimately everybody in the alliance, all of ISAF, and most importantly, the people of Afghanistan and Pakistan understand that neither country is going to have the kind of security, stability, and prosperity that it needs unless they can resolve some of these outstanding issues and join in common purpose with the international community in making sure that these regions are not harboring extremists. So I don't want to paper over real challenges there. There's no doubt that there have been tensions between ISAF in Pakistan, the United States and Pakistan, over the last several months. I think they are being worked through, both military and diplomatic channels. But ultimately, it is in our interest to see a successful, stable Pakistan, and it is in Pakistan's interests to work with us and the world community to ensure that they themselves are not consumed by extremism that is in their midst. And so we're going to keep on going at this, and I think every NATO member, every ISAF member is committed to that. Hans Nichols. Where's Hans? There we go.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Yesterday, your friend and ally, Cory Booker, said that an ad that you released, that your campaign released, was nauseating, and it alleged that Romney at Bain Capital was, quote, responsible for job losses at a Kansas City steel mill. Is that your view, that Romney is personally responsible for those job losses? Will comments from Booker and your former auto czar, Steve Ratner, that have criticized some of these advertisements, call on you to pull back a little bit? And generally, can you give us your sense, three-part, Mr. President, could you give us your sense of just what private equity's role is in stemming job losses as they seek a return on investment for their investors? Thank you.
Well, first of all, I think Cory Booker is an outstanding mayor. He's doing great work in Newark and obviously helping to turn that city around. And I think it's important to recognize that this issue is not a, quote, distraction. This is part of the debate that we're going to be having in this election campaign about how do we create an economy where everybody, from top to bottom, folks on Wall Street and folks on Main Street, have a shot at success. And if they're working hard and they're acting responsibly, that they're able to live out the American dream. Now, I think my view of private equity is that it is set up to maximize profits. And that's a healthy part of the free market. That's that's part of the role of a lot of business people. That's not unique to private equity. And as I think my representatives have said repeatedly, and I will say today, I think there are folks who do good work in that area, and there are times where they identify the capacity for the economy to create new jobs or new industries. But understand that their priority is to maximize profits. And that's not always going to be good for communities or businesses or workers. And the reason this is relevant to the campaign is because my opponent, Governor Romney, his main calling card for why he thinks he should be president is his business experience. Yeah, he's not going out there touting his experience in Massachusetts. He's saying, I'm a business guy and I know how to fix it, and this is his business. And when you're president, as opposed to the head of a private equity firm, then your job is not simply to maximize profits. Your job is to figure out how everybody in the country has a fair shot. Your job is to think about those workers who get laid off and how are we paying for their retraining. Your job is to think about how those communities can start creating new clusters so that they can attract new businesses. Your job as president is to think about how do we set up an equitable tax system so that everybody's paying their fair share, that allows us then to invest in science and technology and infrastructure, all of which are going to help us grow.